Alright, what's up you guys? This is Devin from CenturyFX Studios and we're back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about 10 reasons why you should be shooting in manual. Now, if you look at my channel, I'm starting to move in this manual direction, this manual mode direction. Why? Because a lot of people, it's a hot button topic. A lot of people want to talk about manual, and you're not a real photographer if you don't shoot manual concept, because there's a lot of people who were shooting 20 years ago who shot with film cameras and all these cameras that made you think about everything that you were doing, made you think about your exposure, how you were handling the camera, your perspective, and all these other things, because everything was done manually. You didn't have any help from the camera. You didn't have any auto exposure assistant, any flash exposure assistance. You had all these things now, but you didn't have all those things before. Now we're going to get into the top 10 reasons why you probably should be shooting manual. Number 10, it takes you out of your comfort zone. Think about a piece of artwork. When you first start drawing, you're not in your comfort zone, especially when someone asks you to create something that's a masterpiece. Especially when you start to get good and people start to expect good artistry out of you. Once you get good at creating your own artistry, you want to do it yourself. You have pride in it. You want to be able to make those lines, those circles. I don't know if you remember that episode of SpongeBob when he started to make a great image out of just a circle. He started to get pride in his own work, and his teacher Squidward started to get pride in his own work. You should take that pride with you when you're using your camera, when you're getting the best work. When you get your best work, you start nitpicking yourself. You start to become your own critic. Why? Because you've been through photography when it wasn't comfortable for you. You've been through yourself at your worst. Now, since people are thinking that you're better or the best, you can take pride in it because you've gotten past your comfort zones. And then you push yourself to be more uncomfortable, because you can tell what results you get when you push yourself to do more work than you've done with this camera. The more you're able to advance yourself on the camera by using manual mode, you'll have a lot more pride in using manual, because you'll know exactly how to get the most out of your camera and the most out of you, you know. So with all that being said, number 10 would be taking yourself out of your comfort zone. Because once you take yourself out of your comfort zone, that's when you become the better you in photography. Number 9 is challenge yourself. Come on, guys. Like, if, say for instance, you're a runner. Everybody knows when you're a runner, especially if you've been to any kind of elementary school or middle school sports, you have to take some kind of physical fitness test, right? Well, when you're doing this physical fitness test, you gotta push yourself at some point in time to run. Everybody has to do a little bit of cardio, right? So you have to challenge yourself. You'll see a lot of people around you running faster than you, slower than you, because they're in your class, they're your age. But you're going to see people who have challenged themselves to get past that mile, to get a faster mile, to get more push-ups, get more reps. Same thing with your camera. Anytime you're in a position where you have to challenge yourself to think, you're getting better on your camera. Chances are you're typically shooting in the same environments that you're always shooting in. If you're used to shooting for your child's baseball game or your child's basketball game, say for instance you do a lot of portrait photography, you're stuck in a lot of situations. Well, you typically are not in drastically different situations with the camera. It's either you're inside, outside, or indoors in some type of a building. Now, you're able to use your deductive reasoning as a human. Most people have this ability to deduce. It's just that simple. Your brain's going to say to yourself, oh yeah, we were in this situation before. I remember that my shutter speed was too low. Well, crank that shutter speed up next time you go out there. Photography can be hard in a lot of ways, but when you take from what you've already done and build upon it, photography becomes a lot easier. But you have to put your experiences into context by using manual mode. Manual mode allows you to put your experiences into context, so when you're challenging yourself, you're actually building. But if you put everything in auto mode every time, you're not actually using your brain to put anything in context or even think about anything. So when the next time you go out and do that portrait shoot, you don't have any bearings, you don't have any settings to remember or think about, because you didn't set it in the first place. So since you didn't set it in the first place, or get your focus dot to where it needed to be, or your white balance where it needed to be, or your flash power where it needed to be, then you don't have any bearings in your mind of where your camera needs to be. You don't think I probably need to be at 2/50th of a second to keep the ambient exposure down, and if I want to have it at 2.8, I probably need something like a filter or high-speed sync to keep that ambient exposure down. You don't think about any of those things because you haven't been put in a situation where you're required to remember optimal settings for your optimal situation. So manual says, okay, well, I don't know what I was shooting at last time, or I might know what I was shooting at last time, but I have to find some settings that are optimal for my situation. So it encourages you to think about the settings that you had last time, or whatever settings that the camera comes up with in auto mode. A lot of people who are trying to get better at manual mode, they challenge themselves but help themselves by going and seeing what the camera does in auto mode. Put their camera in a situation, put it in auto mode or program mode or aperture priority or shutter priority, and then they say, okay, is this what the camera's thinking? 1,000th of a second at 2.8 at ISO 100? Oh, it must be a really, really sunny situation. So what I'm going to do is take those settings, and maybe I'm not getting enough exposure on my subject. Well, I'm going to amp up the ISO a little bit and then ramp up the shutter speed a little bit, maybe by one stop. And by bringing the ISO up and bringing the shutter speed up, I can actually bring some more exposure to my subject and then dull down the exposure in the background. Whatever situation you're in, you're able to put those settings in context and remember it every time you go out. I mean, because if you use your camera maybe 3 times a week, it's not hard to remember what settings you had it on before in the exact same situation that you go. Matter of fact, if you go to each one of your images that you take and you click right on that image in your Windows or Mac computer and you go to properties or info, it'll tell you, as long as you didn't erase it in the camera, it'll tell you exactly what you shot it on, shutter speed, f-stop, ISO, whether you use the flash, or the metadata and the exif data. It'll tell you a lot about the image that you took. So you're able to improve and get better by challenging yourself with manual mode. Shutter priority mode and aperture priority mode are better modes, you know, as far as remembering what settings you had on, because you get to choose an actual feature of the camera, whether it be shutter speed, ISO, or aperture. But manual mode has the whole exposure triangle for you to actually learn from. So I know this was a little bit of a long one, but I love this one. Challenge yourself was number 9. Number 8, the real photographer debate. Yes, we gotta get into it. You're not a real photographer if you do not shoot in manual mode. Well, newsflash for most people, manual mode is an option, but it always becomes a secondary option if it means you're gonna lose your shot. If it means I'm gonna lose my shot if I shoot in manual mode, then most of the time I'm not gonna shoot in manual mode, and I've been shooting for 11, 12 years. So I'm not so big on manual mode that I'm going to lose a shot. So if it takes me P mode or aperture priority or shutter priority or aperture value, shutter value, or SV or whatever it is on your camera to get the image, or program or auto mode even, then I'll do that. Now, 99% of the time I will not use auto mode. Matter of fact, I probably have never used auto mode on my Canon 7D. But you have to really think about what situation you're in. There's some ways you can quickly go to manual mode without having to worry about things. You can manual everything and then just go to auto ISO, because manual says, okay, I can choose my shutter speed, I can choose my aperture, ISO, whatever, because I know my camera is good on higher ISOs. If you know manual mode good enough, you can actually use it in a quick situation. You don't have to say, oh, it's manual mode, it's going to take me forever. Or once you get used to manual mode, you can actually pull out a good shot in almost any situation if you know how to use manual mode to your advantage, especially auto ISO. Auto ISO will get you out of a lot of pinches. Let's be realistic, guys. We all know that manual mode keeps you at 1 shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, which means you're subject to whatever changes to the environment. You have to change. You have to be the change. You have to help your camera change and adjust to the environment. And it's really hard to do all the calculations in your head and get off a good shot. It's way too much to think about for most people. So what we have to do is be realistic about the situation. So that's why auto ISO is such a good thing, because you can use auto ISO in a pinch and get off almost any image that you want, as long as you know how to use shutter speed and aperture to your advantage. So we want to all think in this context that manual mode is not easy. And a lot of people do not want to use manual mode. But since photographers have put in the work in the past 20 years, especially if you're shooting a film and you didn't have any auto this, auto that, a lot of them are going to say, hey, well, photography has been this way for years and years and years, you know, 100 years. Photography has been manual, 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 this. All of a sudden, you want to pick up this camera and it does everything for you and you get really good results. That doesn't make you a good, you know, photographer. That just makes you a point and shoot person. Well, what makes a professional photographer a professional photographer, and what makes a photographer a photographer? You can go on a long-winded debate about that. But after everything is said and done, you want to know that when I pick up this camera, I can get the results that I want. And I think that's what makes you a photographer. If you pick up a camera and you can get the exact results, or like 90% of the results that you want, then that makes you a great photographer. So this debate goes down. It goes down to the core of what photography is, and that's being able to set your shutter speed, ISO, aperture to get the exact art piece or image that you want to. Knowing how to use your camera is at the core of what photography is. How are you going to be a swordsman if you don't know how to use a sword? How are you going to be a cook if you don't know how to use a skillet? Like, how it doesn't work. So it's really hard to say that you're not a photographer if you shoot in manual mode. It's really hard to think that you're a photographer if you don't know how to use manual mode and know how to use all of these settings in conjunction with each other. Use manual so you can actually combat this debate. A lot of people are really sensitive about this debate because they can't use manual, and they'll say, oh, well, I can do all this other stuff with my camera and I'm consistently getting the right results, what the results I want to. I can post produce, I can do all of this stuff like that, but you can't use manual. So in my opinion, use manual so you can have a better appreciation for your camera and your photography. I don't think you can get the most out of your photography unless you at least learn how to shoot manual and learn how your camera's thinking based off of setting your own settings by yourself. So that's my opinion on it. I'm not saying you have to shoot manual all the time. That's not me. I'm saying do your best, but at least explore manual. You know, if you can do better with other settings, do better with other settings like AV and TV or whatever you're using, but at least understand manual to a certain extent so you understand exactly everything that your camera is doing with your color, your exposure, the speed of your exposure, all this other stuff. So at least understand manual enough so even if you go back to shutter priority, aperture priority, that you'll be safe. You'll be safe to say, okay, I'm at least in this debate and I don't have to worry about somebody saying I'm not a real photographer, because that will weigh on your conscience and weigh on your spirit if you're really trying to be a great photographer. Number 7 is confidence. You got to be a confident photographer, especially today with all the cell phones and all the portable devices that can actually shoot pictures. Portable, mobile, whatever you want to say. They can all shoot pictures and everybody thinks they're a photographer. Everybody thinks they're this, that, and the other because they're using auto modes on their cell phones and their mobile. Get used to your camera. If you're shooting manual, you're probably going to have a DSLR or mirrorless camera. Get used to that camera. Be confident in shooting manual or whatever you're shooting. Be confident that you can get a result that can wow somebody that's looking over your shoulder, because 9 times out of 10 there's somebody looking at your LCD screen saying, hey, what you get? What kind of picture did you get of me? Let me see this. Just like they flip around the cell phone and they show themselves the picture, or they do a FaceTime or whatever they're doing, or front facing camera or whatever it is nowadays. You have to be able to show them equivalent results from your camera because you have the big camera. 9 times out of 10, when you go to a certain place, they're going to be like, oh, you got the big camera, you're the professional, because people have cell phones now and they're getting comparable results. So if you have a camera that costs $500 to $6 grand, they're going to think, oh, well, this guy's a professional. This guy knows what he's talking about. This guy or girl knows exactly what to do and how to do it to get a better image than I'm getting out of my cell phone camera. Why? Because they are carrying this heavy thing with this heavy lens with all this money. They have to have invested some time into knowing how it works, right? So using manual will get your confidence up, because manual is something that I say most of the cameras that are on cell phones can't use. But at the end of the day, download that app for Lightroom. You can get more control of your cell phone, but most people don't have control and they don't want that control. You need to get your confidence up so you're able to deliver on that product. You're able to deliver somebody a good product by looking at the back of your screen after you take the picture without even you having to worry about it. I have to do this a whole bunch of times when I'm out in the field. showing people what the image looks like, and be willing to show people what your image looks like. Why? Because that shows them that you're a good photographer. That shows them that you know what you're doing, and that if you're doing a photo shoot or anything for anybody, that, hey, I can give you a card, or hey, you can hire me for something else. Who would want to get money just by showing somebody the back of their screen and retaining a client or something like that? So be confident in your photography. If somebody wants to look at the back of your LCD screen, be confident enough to be like, hey, look at this. You see what I got here? Look, this is one of the best images that I've ever taken. And be confident in knowing that you have a good image, regardless of what they think or say, and build your confidence. Learn exactly what manual is, so by the time you're able to shoot in any mode, that builds all kinds of confidence. Number 6 will be image quality. This is an obvious fact. When you're shooting in manual, you either mess the image up or get the image exactly how you want to. If you look at the image and you go back, you pixel peep and you zoom in, ADDs and 5D Mark IVs are really good for this, pinching to zoom and looking at pixel peep. Try to get the most out of your images, especially when you're doing sports photography. You need to zoom in and make sure everything, is still, if you're trying to get it still. If you're trying to get it blurred, a certain part, if somebody's drumming or somebody's throwing a ball or somebody's kicking a ball and you want the ball to be blurred, but you want the person to be in focus, whatever you're trying to achieve, make sure you achieved it by zooming and pixel peeping. Make sure you have good image quality. But you have to shoot in manual, so your pictures are not all over the place. If you keep shooting auto, you're going to see random shutter speeds and ISO values and aperture values, because you have no control over what's happening. So your camera's just giving you a whole an amalgam of different image settings and different image quality settings, and you're just like, okay, I hope I get it right, or I don't know what I'm going to get at this point in time. Don't spend $500 to $6,000 on a DSLR or mirrorless camera and not know exactly what you're getting in and not getting the results that you want. Try to shoot manual sometime and get your confidence up, like I said before, and get the image quality that you want. Make corrections every time you see that image. You'll be like, okay, I went to my son's soccer game. I was shooting at maybe 500th of a second or 1/500. Let me try 1/1000 and then up my ISO a little bit so I can compensate for the lighting and keep that same light at that same time of day and get a better image than I had before. You can do that, and with manual mode you can keep track of your settings. It's like when you're trying to be on a diet or something like that. You keep track of what you're eating, you keep track of your weights if you're trying to gain weight, or you're trying to lift weights. You keep up with the amount of weight that you're lifting and you're pulling down, and how many push-ups are you doing. You keep track of that. Why? Because you want to get better. Same thing with manual mode. Take a picture, see the settings, look at the, like I said, click right on your picture in Windows or whatever you have, Mac. Look at the settings and then change it. Try to amp it up. If you see something wrong with it, change it. If you see the colors are off, see how you're white balancing. If you're auto white balancing, go to custom white balance. Always put your input into what the camera's doing so you can get the best results, and you can do that by shooting manual. Number 5 will be flash control. Now, a lot of people may or may not have a flash, but if you have a pop-up flash on your camera, this applies. If you have a speed light, it applies. If you have any kind of old strobes that don't have a lot of controls with them, it applies definitely to those. It also applies to anybody who has a speed light, who has like a Canon 600 EXRT or whatever you're using. Even if it's a big daddy speed light with radio controls, shoot manual. Why? Because you want your camera to be in a constant exposure and a constant. You should be able to know exactly what your cameras are doing, so by the time you put something extra, some extra exposure in it, you can measure that exposure separate from your camera. So if you're shooting manual, you know your camera and what it's doing is not going to change unless you change it. But if you are shooting with a flash and you're shooting auto mode in your camera and then auto mode in your flash, there's so many things that are going on right there computationally that you're not going to be able to keep up with it. You're not going to be able to make your image better. And 9 times out of 10, when you're shooting with a camera and you're shooting with the flash, you overexpose it and it messes up the image. And a lot of people don't like to shoot with flash because they don't know how to control that flash. Well, if you shoot and you shoot manually and you know how to shoot manually with your camera, and your camera set it some settings that you know exactly what it's supposed to look like, if you have a problem with your image with the flash, it's probably going to be the flash that's the problem. The flash is exposing how it's exposing, because the flash exposure changes whether you want to or not, especially if your battery power is running low. The amount of flashes that you can get out of that flash is going to change if your battery's going low. So the last thing you want to worry about is the exposure on your camera changing to try to compensate for things that it doesn't know that's happening. It doesn't know that your flash is running out of battery power and that the flash exposure is going to be less than it was before. It doesn't know maybe the sun came up a little bit more and you're outside and using high-speed sync. It doesn't know how to compensate for all those things. So it's inevitably going to get it wrong. There's a lot of things that you have to worry about with the flash. So you want a solid foundation and exposure with your camera, and then work on your flash exposure, because your flash has its own compensation and exposures itself. So to keep yourself from getting confused, shoot manual. It'll help your flash control a lot more. Aperture. Now, a lot of people like to use aperture priority mode, but if you're in a really bright situation and you're using aperture priority mode, that might conflict with a lot of things that you're trying to do. Because say for example, you're in a bright situation, but your ISO for whatever reason has ramped up or whatever, and your shutter speed is really low to the point where you're getting handshake, but you're in a really bright situation. What if your actual subject is not in well light, but you are in a really bright backlit situation? How is your camera going to expose for that? How do you know if it's right? How do you know it's wrong? Why are you getting camera shake? You see what I'm saying? So if you put it in aperture priority, or you rely solely on just setting your aperture, then you may get something wrong with your shutter speed, because you always are in a changing situation. Usually you're in a changing situation, especially if you're outside, and a lot of people want to take pictures outside of the beach doing whatever they want to do. They're going to need this tip. So tip number 4 will be aperture, because you want to make sure that your aperture doesn't put you in a limiting situation, especially if you're shooting with a kit lens with a variable aperture. I already told you guys about how variable aperture lenses and kit lenses really throw off your settings, because when you zoom in, you're losing, a stop and change of light. So you're losing a lot of light and you don't even know this. So your settings are changing, but your light is changing, but is your settings changing? Are you in a mode where it's compensating the best? And if you're in aperture priority mode and you're at 3.5 and it automatically goes to 5.6 once you zoom in, how are you compensating with that? Are you compensating with that via shutter speed or ISO? Or are you doing everything in post and trying to equalize everything so it doesn't look all grainy, or it doesn't look like you've had camera shake just because you zoomed in and lost some stops of exposure on your shutter speed side? Why? Because you probably have it in manual automatic mode. So switch it to manual mode so you're able to compensate for the things that go wrong with your lens. You can't just stay in aperture or aperture priority mode, especially if your lens has a variable aperture. You're going to lose image quality and you're going to end up with a lot of problems. So number 4 will be aperture. We'll move on to number 3, which is shutter speed. If you stay in shutter priority mode a lot of times, it might cause you some problems, because when your camera's doing the computation with your ISO speed and your aperture, if you have a variable aperture lens like the 18-135, which is a great lens, I think the STM lens that's a kit lens for Canon, it still absorbs light when it goes inside. It takes away light when you zoom in, especially at the 135 end, where a lot of people, I like to shoot at the 135 end, and that gives you a nice compressed backdrop, and it gives you a distinct look that a lot of full frame cameras, you got to spend a lot of money to get. But you have to understand that your settings are changing. Why? Because you're zooming in. If you're zooming in, what's your camera going to do to compensate for the amount of light that you're losing? Are you going to compromise on image quality by amping up the ISO? That's probably what the camera's going to do, because that's the easiest thing to do. Amplify your ISO. And what's the ISO going to do? Add more noise to the image, which means it's going to bring down your image quality to what cell phone image quality standards. So what you want to do is take control of your shutter speed. And usually the image issues that you have with shutter speed is if your camera decides to bring down your shutter speed to compensate for any light that you're losing, especially if you have a kit lens or a variable aperture lens, you're probably going to lose out on shutter speed to the point where you get a lot more camera shake, or you're not going to be able to freeze the subject like you want to. Usually if you have IS on your lens, you're able to keep it in like a steady, as far as you holding the camera, you can keep it steady. Now, if your subject is moving this way and that way and that way, you're not going to be able to compensate for all of that. And then you're going to find yourself in a limiting situation where if you have a T6 or a T6i or T6s and you brought a kit lens with it, which chances are you probably did, then you're going to be thinking that your camera sucks. My camera sucks, man. I spent $600, $700, maybe even $1,000 on this ADD, and I'm using this kit lens, and I think my camera sucks. Well, no, it's just probably the lens, and then your camera trying to compensate for the fact that your lens is not giving you what you want. Chances are, the manufacturers, the people who sell you these kit lenses with the smaller body cameras, they think that you're going to be shooting in automatic mode. since they think that you're going to be shooting in automatic mode, you're already always compensated. You're already always compensated. So you don't even think about how much image quality you're losing when you zoom in, because you're shooting in automatic mode. If you're losing aperture value, then if you're stopping down, you know, when you zoom in, which is what you're doing, going from 3.5 to 5.6 most of the time, camera's gonna be like, okay, well, he's zooming in again, or she's zooming in again. Let me ramp up the ISO, or let me ramp up the shutter or bring down the shutter speed and make it slower so we can capture this image exactly how she wants or he wants. And you might be thinking, hey, I'm not getting the results that I want. Well, the camera's doing a whole bunch of compensation because manufacturers rely on you to be using auto this, auto that. So all in all, with shutter speed, guys, shoot manual so you don't have to worry about your camera trying to compensate for anything that you want. Number 2 would be ISO and auto ISO. Now, if you're using ISO and auto ISO, you're in a good situation. Nowadays, you have cameras that can go up in ISO, but I would not rely on higher ISOs to make your images, because there are certain situations where you're going to need higher ISOs or higher light values to get away with certain images, and it's not going to give you the exact results that you want. For example, I do a lot of theater photography. When I'm in the theater, I don't know what the lighting situations are going to be like. I don't know what the stage is going to be like. They can put any kind of light at any situation at any time. So what I end up doing is shooting manual and shooting auto ISO, because there's no way in the world I'm going to know, you know, how many different light situations and how many different settings that I'm going to need to shoot at my camera, especially if I'm looking for emotion, moments, all these other things that I can't, you know, at any point in time kind of prepare for. Well, I can't prepare for it if I've seen the play before, but every actor is different, and there's always a different actor on stage. So every actor is going to act it out differently. Every actor is going to move differently, have different expressions at different times. So there's no way I can think about all these changing variables when I'm shooting my camera, especially if they're changing my entire lighting situation. But I do know what my shutter speed needs to be, because I'm shooting humans. So if my subject is humans are going to move at a certain speed at a certain time. If I know a whole bunch of dancers are coming on the set of the or the stage, I'll know that I need to amp up my shutter speed to from 1/250th of a second to 1/500th of a second. And sometimes that's not exactly enough, but the ratio or shutter speed to noise, I can deal with it in post. But I can try my best to get off the best images I can possibly get regarding all the changing situations, and auto ISO helps me. So when I'm shooting manual, I already know I need to be wide open as far as aperture is concerned, 2.8, not necessarily 1.8. I wouldn't do 1.8 on the stage because there's a whole bunch of different reasons why, you know, especially regarding your focus mode. Auto ISO can save your life in manual mode. You want to be able to use auto ISO to get you out in the pinch. That's number 2. Number 1. The number 1 reason why you should be shooting manual and it benefits you: control. You have control over all situations with your camera. You no longer will have an excuse when you shoot manual, and you can control the camera exactly how you want to control it, because you'll know, okay, my camera can't shoot at this ISO, or this image is going to be broken or done or too noisy. It won't go to the client. I can't shoot this client at this ISO, so I'm going to need to get a flash. I'm going to need to get external lighting. I'm going to need to bring in put myself in a situation where I can control each variable, not only ISO, aperture, shutter speed, but if I don't have enough light, I need to know how to get, because you don't have, especially if you're a professional photographer, you don't have the ability, you don't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, I didn't know what to do with this situation. Especially if you're shooting for corporate clients and things of that nature. There are some clients, of course, that are going to be like, oh, it's okay, you can come shoot again. Boy, if you're at a wedding, you don't have that ability. You don't have that ability if you're at a wedding. All these things being said, you do not have control over everything that you come in contact with your camera. Every situation, every person that you come in contact with, everybody moves differently. There's so many chances for you to lose images that you have no reason not to shoot manual and can take full control over your camera. You have to take full control of your camera, because if you can control your camera, the very least you can say is that, oh, you know, my camera did exactly what it was supposed to do, or I was supposed to do everything on my part and use my tool to my maximum potential to get exactly what I wanted to get. And most of the time, when you're able to use your tool to your maximum potential, you'll have no excuses when it comes to taking pictures with your camera. Alright guys, I'm done. That was our top 10. I know it took a long time, but I'm very passionate about this manual mode thing. If you stayed to the end of the video, I appreciate it. You probably are a loyal subscriber. I love to talk, but I love to talk about camera stuff. So you knew how long the video was probably before you started it. So if you're here for a reason. So I appreciate you watching the video. Stay tuned. I'm going to do a lot more videos on manual in certain situations. How to do manual in the studio is what I'm working on now. Working on the script, doing that. But this is Devin for CenturyFX Studios, guys. And you guys keep shooting your cameras on manual mode.